You can start today doing construction site monitoring. The Mini platform is very appealing to someone that's already in the industry and looking to add aerial data intelligence to their tool set.
Nobody's put in an unnecessary situation where they're on a roof.
And this is a common flight review and actually Transport Canada exam question. You're using a tool that saves you time, increases your productivity in your existing business. We're not even talking about starting a new business at this point. Just good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Coastal Drone Weekly Live. This is your go-to podcast for all things drones. Whether you're a seasoned pilot or just starting out, we've got you covered in the latest in industry news, expert tips on drone flying, creative ways to make money with drones, and of course, insider advice on how to launch your drone career. I'm your host, Ian, and today also are your host, Finn. And beyond the booth behind us is Cam. We're going to be diving into the world of drones on construction sites this week, as Finn is properly attired for the job. Let's get started, and you take it away.
Yeah, so in today's talk, we're going to talk about some of the regulations and considerations that go into starting up a drone construction as a drone service provider. We'll talk about some of the applications for use, site monitoring, and things like that. We'll talk about what should be in your gear bag when you're going to a construction site and how to get started in this section of the drone industry. So first up, we're going to talk about some of the regulations and considerations. First question that you get asked anytime anyone ever wants to do drones for work: do you need a basic or advanced certificate? The answer to this question is maybe. So if you are looking to do a drone flight, with a drone that weighs over 250 grams, you need at minimum a basic or advanced certificate. If you are using a drone that is over 250 grams for work, we would recommend an advanced certificate, because if you just have the basic, you will not be able to fly in controlled airspace, and you will not be able to fly within 100 feet of people, which means that if you are at a construction site in a busy area, that it will be impossible to maintain the 100-foot radius from people. You would not be able to complete that flight. Now, there are other drones like this one. This is the DJI Mini 4 Pro. This is a drone that weighs 249 grams or less. Drones in this category are classified as micro drones, and they do not require a certificate to fly.
Yeah.
However, when we're talking about some of these more professional applications, there are advantages to using the drones that are bigger, above 250 grams. So one of the ones that we'll talk a little bit about later is the DJI Mavic 3 series. This is the telephoto lens, and there's two telephoto lenses on. Is it the Pro model of the DJI Mavic 3, and the 166 telephoto lens will give you much more detail if you needed to do inspection or monitoring of a specific aspect of this construction job.
Mm-hmm.
So, to answer the question, do you need a basic or advanced certificate? We would recommend an advanced certificate for these types of operations.
Yeah, so let's take a kind of a foundational step here, since we're talking about construction sites and everything else, and we're obviously jumping and getting the certification side of it out of the way first. The reality is you can start today doing construction site monitoring with a drone by going down to your local retailer, picking up a sub 250 gram drone in Canada without any training or certification, and just relying on the getting started manual and the guide. You can pop up a drone and have it over your construction site and get progress shots done today for $700 Canadian, give or take. Costco always has really good deals on the end of run stuff. There's Best Buy, London Drugs in Canada, Amazon, right? So you could probably have same day delivery, right? Now, the Mini 4 Pro is the current absolute best sub 250 gram drone that exists. It has obstacle avoidance. It has a 4K camera that shoots in really significantly low light for what it is. It's very good at it. You can take raw photos. You can take spherical panoramas. There's huge businesses that are built purely on the sub 250 gram category. So is that good enough? For a lot of our audience, probably, right? So the reality of it is it comes less about the training and certification on site. And of course, what's Coastal do? We're training and certification providers, right? So our business is to sell you on courses, and there's good reason for it. But if you're looking to get into drones on construction site and you want to have a low risk, simplified system, the Mini 4 Pro is going to be a great option for a lot of customers out there. Mm-hmm. Now, why do we need to upgrade, right? So we're talking about the Mavic 3, for example. Mavic 3 is a 4 times larger sensor to start with. You can get a parachute, so that limits the risk when you're flying over people, as long as you have an advanced operations certificate. It has programmable mission capabilities. If you're using waypoints on the enterprise level, you have a thermal sensor option, and you have more flight time, more range, more wind resistance, more capability, right? So that's kind of where we're starting to talk now about the 3 and the enterprise.
Yes. And then when you're talking about the larger drones, part of what has happened in the drone industry, I'd say in the last couple of years, is the industry is trending towards equipment specialization. The Mini 4 Pro, I would characterize this drone as being kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none.
Yes.
But some of these enterprise level drones are specifically good at one thing.
Yeah, they
And
become more precision tools.
yes, and having access to specialized equipment, if you were looking to start a business, having access to specialized equipment would set you apart from different other service providers if they were running something like the Mini 4. Now, that's up to you as someone who is getting into the business to decide which kind of path you'd like to go down. But
Absolutely.
from a purely regulatory perspective, this does not require certification.
Mm-hmm.
But the drones above that do require certification. And if you're using a drone for work, we always recommend advanced.
Yeah. Well, and the reasons are, so in Canada, and we'll just compare this as well, because in the States, if you're in the USA listening, you have to have a Part 107 for any kind of commercial intent operation, right? So a Part 107 is a in-person test, and you have to maintain your recency for that. In Canada, in order to do any kind of commercial drone operation, there is no specific certification, right? So micro, basic, or advanced all allow both private and commercial operations. The reason we suggest, and everyone else will also suggest, that you hold your advanced certificate is you run a higher level of training, higher level of knowledge, higher level of professionalism, and a higher level of flexibility. So you now have the option, if a customer calls and is like, we need you to survey this site, it's either downtown in an urban environment, so yes, you're going to be definitely closer than 100 feet from bystanders, or it's in close proximity to an aerodrome or an airport. And that's also a requirement to have a pilot certificate, an advanced pilot certificate. And a lot of urban areas are covered by controlled airspace, right? Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton, Montreal, pretty much all major cities, Winnipeg, apologies to Saskatchewan, Regina, Saskatoon as well.
Those cities are also covered by controlled airs, and even some smaller places in Canada. Most mid-sized cities and towns in Canada have a regional airport where there's probably some sort of regional carrier that goes there. Places like Thunder Bay, Sault Ste. Marie,
Even Yellowknife and Whitehorse are both controlled airspace over the cities.
Yeah, so basically anything built up, you may require an advanced pilot certificate.
So a couple questions that are kind of on point at the same time here as we're talking. Kyle mentions we have a DJI M300, so a Matrice 300, which is a 12 kilogram drone. This is a big drone. What density of public do you need to flight over people certification for your drone, i.e. adding a parachute? So there is no density or population density requirement in Canada for flight over people. It's any one person that is not involved in the operation, that has not been briefed, that is not aware of the risks, and has not been given the opportunity to leave the area.
Yeah, and so this was our next slide is if you're doing near and over people operations, who counts as crew? Because, so we're talking about a construction site, right? There may be workers at the construction site who are there to work on the construction site.
Mm-hmm.
Can you fly near them? Can you fly over them without the parachute? Can you consider them crew?
Do you want me to answer?
Yes.
Okay. So if you're working in a construction site, your standard operating procedures, of course, in any drone operation is to include a crew briefing. Now your crew has expanded to include everyone that is part of your drone operation. And when you're in a construction site, there's a very good chance that you're going to be flying over construction workers. You need to facilitate some way of incorporating the safety and hazard identification into this briefing. So many construction sites will have what's called a tailgate meeting or a pre-job hazard assessment. It may not be feasible for you as the drone pilot to go and meet with every single person and brief them. So what's better to do is to brief the site supervisor or the safety manager and explain the risks and say, look, these are the hazards we're going to be dealing with. Is everyone on site wearing PPE? Yes. So they're all wearing hard hats, glasses, vests, typically. Okay, that's one thing that we can use to mitigate the risks and the hazard. The second thing is let's brief everyone to where the drone's going to be. And unless you're in a vehicle or in construction equipment that has a roof, don't go within 16 feet of the horizontal distance from the drone. Because as an advanced operation, as long as the drone you're using has a near people certification, you can fly up to 16.5 feet from a person at any altitude that you're allowed to fly at. That's one way to start mitigating the risk and control your operational area. If it's unavoidable to fly within 16 feet of the person, they either need to be, again, subject of the film, subject of the operation, part of the crew, of either visual observers or something like that, or again, fully briefed and part of it, or else you need a parachute.
Yeah, and we've done a video on what the minimum requirements for a crew briefing are, but just just to kind of touch on it, they need to know like what the operation is, where the drone is going to be. They need to know the location and use of safety equipment. They need to know about the location of standard operating procedures. If you would like to fly over somebody, you have to treat them like they were like a crew.
Yeah, they can't be bystanders.
No.
They can't be people walking down the street.
No.
So if let's say you're doing an orthomosaic or capturing photos for photogrammetry for building construction progress or something like that. If you're shooting in an oblique angle, which is where the camera is no longer pointing straight down, but it's now pointing at some sort of angle, your flight path is going to extend beyond the subject area property because it's going to have to go out, turn around, and come back in order to get the bottom of the frame in the shot. If you're working on a construction site, it's got a fence. Arguably, everything inside the fence is fine, but everything outside on the streets, on the sidewalks, those are now bystanders. So in order to do that, you're going to need some sort of over people safety assurance declaration, which could be using a matrice with a parachute, or it could be using a fixed wing survey drone.
How high can you fly, and what is the rules about flying around a structure?
Yeah, so this is going to come down to the airspace. And this is a common flight review and actually Transport Canada exam question. How high can you fly a drone in Canada? So the default answer is 400 feet above ground for any drone that's 250 grams or more. But there are circumstances where you can fly higher. In controlled airspace, you may be allowed to fly higher with permission from the air traffic control provider, or they may require you to fly lower to be out of the way of other air traffic. So it may not be 400 feet, it might be 200 feet, it could be 700 feet. The practicality of that is going to vary based on the circumstances and the situation. But in controlled airspace, you might be able to fly higher or lower without getting a special flight operation certificate. In uncontrolled airspace, so Class G or Class F advisory airspace that is sitting on top of Class G airspace, or Class E airspace that is no contact, so there's no air navigation services provided to it. So usually that's like extended control areas past airports that are that transition area between control zones. In that, what is arguably uncontrolled airspace, there's no ATC provided, you can only fly up to 400 feet by default. However, if you're within 200 feet horizontally of a structure, and a structure could be a tower, a building, a windmill, something like that, you can fly up to 100 feet above that structure. So you imagine you've got a box around that structure. You can fly up to 100 feet above that structure and then out 200 feet. Now, you can do that with a basic certificate and an advanced certificate, but if you only have a basic certificate, and let's say you're on a mountain like Sumas Mountain, it's 2,000 feet MSL or mean sea level or above sea level. The Class E airspace above it starts at, let's say it starts at 2,000 just for the sake of this. It's higher or lower, I can't remember.
I think it's 1,200.
Okay, so when you're standing on the top of Sumas Mountain, you are now in Class E airspace. Let's say that it starts higher than that, though, for the point of my image here. So you're going to go fly a 1,000-foot tower. The drone can go to 1,100 feet above the tower. However, at 500 feet, the airspace changes from Class G to Class E. It now becomes controlled, but it's no contact. you cannot fly into that as a basic pilot. So even though you're in the middle of nowhere, arguably there should be no airplanes or helicopters nearby, right? Because you're at a tower. That'd be crazy. But that Class E airspace exists to prevent low weather operations from happening without control. So you can't fly into that space as a basic pilot.
Yep, that's right. So those are some of the regulatory considerations for construction sites. Now,
and sorry, just to wrap that up,
sure.
if you need to fly higher than 400 feet for a construction site in the middle of nowhere away from a structure, say you're surveying a very large area, and the most efficient way to do it would be to survey it at 800 feet or 900 feet, you would then need to apply for a special flight operations certificate, which is a lengthy process, takes at least 30 business days to do. We have several videos on the channel that we'll link for talking more about that.
All right, so those are some of the regulatory considerations for flying at construction sites. Let's talk about some of the applications, the actual things that you can do. So on drone construction sites, you can do some planning, data collection, progress monitoring, hazard monitoring, surveys, autonomous surveys, and inventory monitoring. So one of the examples that I've heard in the past is most buildings these days are designed in computer assisted design, in a CAD software, computer automated design. And then those CAD documents get sent to the construction site and they build it. And inevitably, because real life is not CAD, there could be some discrepancies between, very, very minor discrepancies between the original drawing and how it is in real life. One of the things that you could do with a drone is use a LiDAR camera to get a very accurate point cloud of how the building is looking, to monitor if the construction job is following what the plans say. And then if it is not following the plans in a significant way, you could potentially say or ask if there's going to be a structural issue with this.
Yeah.
With this discrepancy.
So we're talking about design build verification, right?
Exactly.
So the engineers, the original draft will lay out everything. The ground will be surveyed either traditionally or using drones. Then they'll set their initial plan, build the structure or place the equipment, and then a measurement company will come in and either use ground-based LiDAR or drone-based LiDAR or photogrammetry to verify the coordinates of the corners of the pad, let's say, or the structure. So there's multiple ways that you can do this using drones. They're very accurate, and you have to have some sort of ground-based control in order to do that. But the point is, there is always an average error. It could be centimeters, it could be feet. It could be a very large margin. And depending on the project complexity, it might be tolerable. But like, let's say building a house might be not as accurate as building a nuclear power plant, right? You're going to have millimeter level precision because the components and everything gets pre-machined. So the level of accuracy will be whatever is acceptable for the construction of that project. Since we're talking about applications right now, there's a good one. It's kind of a segue, and we'll get back to that list there. Kyle in the chat mentioned, I hope you entertain the topic of photogrammetry software choices for modeling underground structures such as piping under installation rather than just ordinary orthoimagery. I'd love to hear more about this, and this is definitely a bigger topic on the underground component of it, because there's tons of advancements in this. Flyability has the Helios. The M300 can do some underground. What's the name of the spinning? There's a bunch of different LiDAR heads that are designed for hover map. MSN hover map will do real-time mapping and flying in its own point cloud. But on the photogrammetry side of it, so pretty much most drones have the capability of capturing images that can be used for photogrammetry. And photogrammetry is a process by which you take a series of overlapping photos, you measure the difference from photo A to photo B on a common point. So you have basically, if you see a house on one and then you see a house on another photo at a separate angle, it then extrapolates the distance from the house to the camera on point one and then measures the distance from that to point two. And eventually, once you have enough points and overlaps, it creates what's called a point cloud, which is a bunch of pixels in 3D or volumetric space. Those pixels are then mapped to a known point in space using GPS and ground-based augmentation, so either control points on the ground or using other GPSs. They then start to build that 3D point cloud and then start drawing triangles between those pixels, just like in a 3D game model, and then you can build a 3D model from photos. So the process is done with a series of good quality overlapping photos at the bare minimum.
If you want to get an example of this, you can just go onto Google Earth and hit the 3D button, and maybe your house will appear 3D.
Yeah, because what happens is a plane or satellite flies overhead. Most of the photogrammetry in Google Earth is done by airplane-based photos because the resolution is twice as good as satellite. But those are just a bunch of photos pointing straight down, or nadir, that then get used to create that 3D model. Now, what I'm talking about is the same thing we go back to. At the bare minimum today, you can get the Mini 4 Pro and go and do photogrammetry. Is it going to be good enough? No. This is one of the main weaknesses of a micro drone is you would have to lay down ground control using like propeller arrow points or WAS GPS to augment points with spray paint and everything else. But the drone itself is not very good at flying the pre-programmed missions that need to be flown in order to get that consistent imagery for building those photogrammetry models. So that's where you start stepping up to like the Mavic 3 Enterprise, which has the bigger camera. It has the mechanical shutter so that it can move quicker while it's mapping, so it's more efficient. It takes half the time to do the same amount of area that a smaller or less capable drone would do. I really want to dig into the underground side of it. That's really cool because you're basically going to be taking
to the underground side. Very nice.
This is a serious podcast. Let's chat more about that. So, but in terms of software choices, top level, right? You've got Pix4D, which is cloud and desktop based, that you can load in imagery. There's so many different facets of Pix4D or architecture now. You've got mapping, photogrammetry, export to CAD, multispectral farming in the multispectral space. There's so much. I don't use it enough to really. We don't use enough of the software these days. Drone Deploy, another cloud-based system that also will do exports and design builds. So you can do very easy reporting from these, where you just load all your imagery into it, and then you can build a customer-driven report right from it. And then also it's another couple software. Spexy has their platform. They're BC-based. They have same thing, cloud processing. Upload, plan your mission right in it, and then you can export it really quick. And then Maps Made Easy is another good option out there.
The other one that I can think of, open source software, is QGIS.
Right.
Is open source GIS software. Now that's a little bit more. It's open source. We've talked about it before on the show. It comes with all of the pros and cons of open source software, which is you can get it for free, and there's a lot of plugins for it. But also, if you need a specific plugin, you have to code it yourself.
Yeah, I've installed it 4 times over the last 4 or 5 years, and yet to make a map out of it. I get started and then kind of give up. So
this is like QGIS is more like it is GIS software, so there's a little bit more of a learning curve than some of the ones that are specific to drones. It's more of a general GIS, not just for drones, for any GIS.
It's great for working with polygons and building out maps and everything else. That's what it's intended for. The ortho imagery, the processing side of it is kind of a separate engine that supports it, and that's where things get a little complicated.
So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other stuff on this list. So hazard monitoring, pretty straightforward to think of. You use the drone to get a bird's eye view, make sure that there's no like hazards. Like maybe you're working with a big crane and you want to make sure that maybe it's hard to see over a wall or a bulkhead or something. You can see what's behind it.
Or gas detection.
Exactly.
In the hazard side.
And then inventory monitoring. We've talked about putting QR codes on the top of vehicles or something like this.
Yep.
Or if you're working with like aggregates like gravel, using the drone to measure how much aggregate is in the pile.
Yeah. If you have a very thanks Kyle, Metashape. I've used Metashape a lot. I completely blanked on it. It's one of my favorites. So Agisoft has Metashape. There's a Pro and there's a less pro version, I guess. It's primarily desktop based. It's very performant. It works really well on both Mac and PC. And you can buy a one-time license for it as well. It's not necessarily subscription based, so you can stick with that. And I've had the most success processing in Metashape on some pretty hard projects. So completely blanked on that. Sorry. The inventory management, the hazard monitoring. A lot of pipelines have been using the Matrice 300 or 350 now with an overhead gas detection system. So they'll fly the line and look for any kind of emissions or anything that's going to cause a problem along the line as they're constructing it. And then afterwards, when they pressurize it again, they'll fly it again. And so they have their baseline and then they can see spots. And at the same time, they'll fly with a thermal camera to look at the junction points on the pipeline to see is there any concerns or any cold spots or hot spots where the gas may be coming out.
So this is from Drone Deploy, just an overview of some of the things you can do.
Only get with a UAV that the client really needs for their job sites. Multivista is a unique company where we're full documentation specialists, so we have everything from cameras to laser scanners to web cameras and now UAVs. We looked around through the market and ultimately decided that we wanted to partner with Drone Deploy to do all of our map engine processing. We go and capture all of the information and then we have Drone Deploy process all of that. It continually impresses me and impresses our clients how accurate and how good looking the imagery is, as well as the models. All these standard features that...
Yeah, so cool thing with Drone Deploy is you can do time over change tracking as well.
Change over time.
Change over time, sorry. Yeah. I haven't had coffee yet.
Neither have I.
So and there's two ways you can do this. Again, we can go all the way back to not requiring certification or anything, because you can use something like the Photokite, which is a drone. It's a tethered flying camera platform. It's not a drone because it goes straight up and it stays up, and it's got a power supply in the truck and it just sits there on the construction. So it's like a tower camera. And during daylight hours, you could have it flying and run a time lapse of the construction site and then bring it down to the ground, bring it back up the next day, right? Or you can program the same mission into any of the enterprise drones to fly the exact same mission every time. You can also do this at the consumer level. The Mini 4 Pro can do this, but its GPS accuracy and camera angle accuracy is not nearly as good.
So let's touch on accuracy right now.
Okay.
So you've mentioned ground stations or using QR codes in this. So what we're talking about on this is RTK, real-time kinematics. So what is RTK and why is it important for construction?
So we call it GPS, but in reality, we're looking at a global navigation satellite system, GNSS. GPS is the North American brand of satellites that we use, or the network that we use. Most drones these days have the ability to support not only GPS, but Baidu, Galileo, and GLONASS potentially, right? So different nations have different GPS networks that they maintain, but the drone will take as many different satellites as it can, because the more satellite links it has, the more accuracy it has. This accuracy is subject to atmospheric interference, time delay, right, diffraction. So what can happen is GPS measures the time that it takes a ping to go from point A to point B. And when you have 14 different points, all those times are measured and compared. In an ionic storm, your GPS accuracy is terrible because you've got tons of interference hitting the upper atmosphere, so your accuracy falls apart. In order to improve that GPS accuracy and have it controlled against a known point in space, we use real-time kinematics, or WAS, wide area augmented GPS. And what happens is we set up a secondary GPS point on a known coordinate on the surface of the Earth that then becomes a local low latency or high speed, basically high speed link, right? A better quality link that augments the accuracy of your drone in space. RTK is the process by doing that. So it's doing real-time corrections of your GPS data of the XYZ that your drone is at, compared to the XYZ of the known fixed point. And it's basically applying correction values to it.
So you need multiple base stations for real-time kinematics. These base stations are expensive.
Yes.
And they are precision pieces of equipment, and you need to also have a known GPS point. But there is an expression in data collection, in remote sensing. This is, again, we've talked about remote sensing in the past. This is a remote sensing concept. The concept is garbage in, garbage out. If you are trying to give accurate make accurate maps, make accurate orthomosaics, make accurate LiDAR point clouds. If the data that goes in is inaccurate, the end product will also be inaccurate. There is no way, if the data that goes in is inaccurate, there's no way to rectify that. You cannot correct it.
Yeah. Well, other than using post-processing
Yes.
kinematics.
But post-processing kinematics is something that you have to, you can't just be like, oh, I forgot to do RTK, let's do PPK.
So-
You kind of have to, you have to know which type of correction you're using before you show up.
Yeah. So you can. I'll argue with you on that because you
Okay.
can. But it's not the best scenario.
No.
So I'll give you a real world scenario of how that could happen. You're asked to survey a property, and you've got a ton of overlap with city streets and everything else. The survey went off fine using an RTK drone, but the base station coordinates weren't set, so it's just very accurate. Absolute or relative accuracy is very high because the drone is an RTK drone and it was precise in its capture, but the image is still the data is still garbage. So then what happens is you have to go back and use a surveyor to look at landmarks that are on the ground that are permanent. So manhole covers, street corners, sidewalk markings, parking stall markings, things like that are permanent and that were in the image when you captured it and are there when you go back. You then take those landmarks and you survey them with a WAS rover GPS system. So using an RTK base station and a rover to get the exact. Or if you really get desperate, you could potentially, if you're using good enough quality imagery, go and look for monument pins. So you look for surveyor's markings that might be in the ground, or you look for the center of manhole covers. If there's a municipal GIS database that has those in, then you could potentially get the lat long and kind of fudge it back. But again, garbage in, garbage out, or trying to save something that you don't want to go and shoot twice.
Yes.
So
The benefits of using RTK, it will increase your accuracy to like centimeter or millimeter level.
yeah, sub centimeter.
Yeah. And then it is more efficient than what you just described there.
Doing it twice.
Doing it twice.
Yeah.
Good. And this is, I wouldn't say not necessarily just good for inspections or surveying. It is almost a requirement for.
Yeah, you need some sort of control.
Yeah.
Be it ground control, pre-post RTK.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't touch on, so if you're doing survey work with an enterprise drone, most DJI drones these days support RTK networks. So you can plug the Mavic 3 Enterprise, for example, can connect to an online data-based RTK source. So if you're in an urban area, you're probably close enough to a RTK base station that is going to be within range over IP that's close enough that it's in the same region that your corrections can be provided over the internet in real time.
Yeah. So then for this one, you'd either pay per job or pay per hour.
Yeah.
There's different options for that. So you're showing up to your construction gig. What should be in your bag? Well, on any construction site, you see the signs when you walk past any construction site. No one can enter this construction site without PPE.
Mm-hmm.
Hard hat, steel-toe boots, safety glasses, and maybe a high-vis vest.
Yeah.
You want to look, I think it's the green triangle for steel-toe boots.
CSA.
Yeah,
approval.
the CSA approval for steel-toe boots. They need to be approved or else they're not.
Yeah. And you can get composite toe boots as well that are CSA approved.
Yeah, I had a friend who was a plumber and he got CSA approved. Someone had to, there was a company that they were taking Adidas Air Force Ones and putting a CSA compliant steel toe into the Air Force Ones.
Wow.
His boss didn't really like that, but he said, all my handbook says is that it needs to be CSA compliant.
I'm more impressed with the Adidas Air Force Ones.
Mm-hmm.
That's like saying Windows MacBook.
Okay.
I'm
Sorry.
going to call
Yeah,
you
you're
out
right.
on it before the audience
Woof.
does.
Woof. Yeah, that's a rough one.
Yeah, so CSA approved footwear, right?
Yep.
Long pants, long shirt. They don't typically want any exposed skin on
No.
construction sites.
And you also don't want your skin to be
No,
exposed
you're
to
going to
a
be working
construction
all
site.
day.
Yeah.
Hard hats is going to be check with the customer because they may either have a color requirement or they might have one provided sometimes because they have a specific code that they need to meet with it. But it's always good to have in your gear bag eye protection, ear protection, right? Either Desi dams like the earplugs or over covers. It's a good opportunity to justify buying a walkie-talkie set for your visual observer as well. You can get those active headsets, so there's a good reason to spend some money. What else? The vest, same thing. The vest might have specific requirements for the job site, and then footwear and gloves.
Yeah.
Right.
Also, like things that we recommend, just like a good sturdy pair of pants. Like
Yep,
you don't want to,
cargo pants.
don't want to show up with shorts.
No.
Um,
You'll be asked to leave.
yeah. Make sure you have all of the emergency equipment you require: fire extinguisher, fire blanket, first aid kit.
Yeah. Don't rely on your customer.
No. And then for your camera, you'll want, if your drone requires ND filters, you want to make sure you have those, and a microfiber cloth because construction sites are kind of dirty.
Actually, in one step further is a can of air.
Yes.
Be careful about the can of air. Of course, some are electronics safe, some aren't. So something to think about.
Yeah. And then, of course, like you'd bring to any other job, spare batteries, spare propellers, launch pad, cones, anything else you would bring to a normal operation. Checklist.
Memory cards, SOPs, airspace permission done well in advance if required.
Yes. So if you're looking into getting into construction monitoring photography, what sort of options are available? So we have talked at length about the differences between the Mini 4 Pro and the Mavic 3 series in terms of cost, regulatory requirement, and cost and benefit. Just to bring some non-DJI into the call here, there's also the Skydio X2, which is a similar size, cost, and capabilities as the Mavic series
At the enterprise level. Yeah.
There are other enterprise options available, but especially for the applications we've been talking about, something that is a similar size as the Mavic is probably what you would be looking for.
Yeah, so the question would be, when should you upgrade from a Mini 4 Pro to a Mavic 3? We've already talked about that. When should you upgrade from a Mavic 3 Enterprise to a Matrice platform? Well, if you need multiple sensors at once, that's something that these can't do. So if you need to do gas detection while doing thermal or ortho or RGB or LiDAR, if you need to do LiDAR period, it's the sensor payload. Currently, aside from Leica, I think, is the only company that makes an integrated LiDAR drone that's in the same weight category as a Mavic 3. There are other integrateds like the Helios. But at the price point they're all basically at the tens of thousands price point. The Matrice is probably the most efficient and the most multi-role that you can get a LiDAR platform.
Yeah, other advantages of the Matrice, hot swappable batteries, so your downtime is less and you can keep the drone in the air longer.
And the fact that it's got weather resistance.
Weather resistance as well. That's a big one.
And big wind resistance.
Yeah, so the Mavic 3 cannot fly if it's raining.
Yeah.
The Matrice could potentially fly if it's raining.
But you might not have good data. So it becomes a bit of a moot point.
Yes.
But for first responders is where the weather resistance is going to pick up more. But yeah, if you're marginal, then you definitely want to consider that.
So how could a new person get started in the industry? Well, the first step is what we've been talking about this entire time: certification and hardware. What hardware are you going to use? And then based on that hardware, what certification do you need? Much with anything, you need to practice. You can't just... You mentioned at the beginning of the call, anyone could go to Best Buy and purchase a drone for $700 and start a business, but
you don't want to show up on your first day.
No, you want to have some practice behind the sticks.
You want to be doing it for a friend or someone else that's going to tolerate your inexperience.
Yes. So start flying, learn your drone's capabilities, be comfortable with the software, like the firmware, and be comfortable with the aircraft's handling and its obstacle avoidance, and just in general its capabilities.
Yeah.
Start with something smaller and then move to a bigger site, and you don't be afraid to learn an additional skill. Take a course in mapping or time lapses or surveying or other things. Part of what's great about these micro drones is we've talked about I called it a jack of all trades, which means that you're not pigeonholed into just one type of drone operation with this aircraft. With some of the other aircraft, as they are more specialized, if you bought a drone with a thermal camera, you're going to be doing thermal missions.
Yeah.
But with something like this, you could in theory do a bunch of different types of operation.
So I'm just thinking about this. If you are currently a tradesperson, right? So say you're a carpenter or a framer, construction, or a roofer or something else, like the Mini platform is very appealing to someone that's already in the industry and looking to add aerial data intelligence to their tool set. Right.
Yes.
So there's a company out there that does septic installation. They use drones every day almost because they use it for location or for site assessment or for planning and mapping and pre and post. Like septic companies using drones all the time.
Roofers use drones all the time.
Yeah. Right?
If you notice that there's a leak in your roof and you ask a roofing company to come up, in the past they would put someone up on a ladder on your roof and they would go and they would look to see.
Take like an hour to get that done.
It would take like an hour to find which shingle they had to replace.
Yeah, what is it first?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then now that person's on a roof, they could potentially slip and fall.
Yep.
Now with the drone, they could find it in 10 minutes, and nobody is put in an unnecessary situation where they are on a roof.
Yeah. So you're using a tool that saves you time, increases your productivity in your existing business. We're not even talking about starting a new business at this point. Just how can these tools be used? And that's where I think the Mini series is great because this is an awesome tool that I can add to my tool bag. As you start to specialize, this is the question I have for the audience. As you start to specialize, if you become focused on purely being an aerial data service provider, right? So now you're an expert drone pilot like us. We're not construction people. We're not surveyors. We're not all these other things. Does that market shift? And now this is the challenge. You're going to be operating with more expensive equipment, but you're going to have less experience on the job site, right? So now the challenge is, do you pair up with a construction company and provide that turnkey service in your area? Or how do you go out and build your business if you're not in that network to start with? Because it might be that you're coming from university with other skills and like this, like, let's be realistic, like drones are data science, right? So you're talking about a GIS or an IT based background and you're going into construction sites and it's a different industry, right?
Yes.
Construction's getting way more technology. This is a prime example, but there are still traditional operations out there, right? So what's going to be the best for you as an audience, and this is something to think about, is what's the best strategy for building your business around that?
Yeah, like if you were someone already working in construction and maybe I did a flight review for someone who was just like, my knees are done from doing construction for 20 years. But this person still had their entire network of everybody they've met in the last 20 years of doing construction. So they're like, I'm going to buy, and they didn't go to this one. They bought the Mavic 3.
Yeah.
A Mavic 3 Pro. So this is a $7,000 drone as opposed to a $700 drone.
Yeah, they're serious.
But they're like, I could get a job tomorrow. I could get a job today. Like I could call someone.
Because they know what the need is.
Because they know what the need is. I could call someone today. As soon as the flight review is over, I could go fly a paid job right now.
Perfect.
So
that's what I'm saying. Like a lot of building business as a new entrepreneur period is networking and finding the need and knowing what's going to work in your area, because it's going to be different in every area.
That's right. So we're in Metro Vancouver. Lots of construction here. Lots of construction in Metro Vancouver. If you're in a place with less construction, I cannot think of a place in Canada with less construction. Everywhere in Canada has a lot of construction, but maybe just opening it up to industry. You're not going to. In Metro Van, we don't have a lot of mining, but we've got some forestry. You go to the Nickel Belt, you're going to have more options in terms of mining.
Yep. So a lot of open air assessment.
Exactly. So we already touched on some of the software that's on the market, Pix4D and Drone Deploy, and then we've talked about some of the other ones. Some other recommendations: insurance. Absolutely. Visual observers could be a benefit on a site.
So just to expand on insurance, you can get annual policies. You can get monthly policies. I think it's getting harder to get day-by-day policies now.
Single job policies.
Exactly. But you want minimum of liability insurance is what we're speaking about here, not crash insurance. We're talking about third-party liability.
Yeah, aviation liability insurance is what it's called. That means if you're operating near another apartment or another building, like maybe it's a glass panel and you crash into the glass panel, your insurance will cover, because that's probably a $10,000 replacement.
Yeah, the liability of it.
Exactly. Consider the airspace you're operating in. Often, this is the one thing I shall mention, even if you're an advanced pilot, a lot of hospitals have helipads. So you need to that is your primary hazard in terms of an aviation hazard, would be a hospital helipad. So Vancouver General Hospital and Vancouver Children's Hospital both have helipads. So does the UBC Hospital. In Edmonton, the hospital at the at the university. I don't recall what the name of that hospital is, but that hospital has a heliport.
Yeah.
Similar in Toronto. And then because you're in a potentially dirty environment, you need to wipe and clean your drone before and after every flight.
Another thing about aviation hazards in a construction site, not having the list here, but noise.
Noise, yeah.
So if your situational awareness is dependent on being able to hear airplanes and helicopters coming towards you and you've got a loader running beside you, you're not going to hear them.
Yeah.
So then you need to work on what other strategies can you use to mitigate that.
Yeah.
So ADS-B is one option. It's not great. It's not mandated in Canada for every aircraft to have ADS-B, which is the digital surveillance broadcast. Extended visual observers, a network of visual observers, right? People that are all on the radio, utilize that site radio to give you another tool. It's like, hey, drone pilot, there's a helicopter coming from the northwest.
Yes.
Great, thank you. I'm going to land.
Yeah.
Something simple.
Exactly. You can use a pad to make sure that to just keep crap out of your motors.
Yeah. Own the area you're going to be taking off and landing from.
Exactly.
Coordinate off.
It should be coned off or taped off or something. Structures and may obscure the vision of the aircraft, and especially like if it's like a steel frame structure that could also interfere with your radio if it's just like steel I-beams or something like
Right.
this. Just consider the flow and the pace of the site, how many people are coming and going. One of the things that often happens on construction sites are third-party contractors may show up, and
They may show up with drones too.
they may show up with drones too, or they just show up without you knowing that there's going to be additional
Yeah.
people in an area.
So then you need some sort of briefing or some sort of maybe a sandwich board at the entrance.
Yes.
That says drone on site. Kyle brings up one thing. He's mentioning their hospital heliport is not on the DJI map. We've talked a lot about this in a couple other episodes about the DJI Fly Safe map versus the NRC site selection tool versus Nav Canada's map. They are at least one of those three is not going to align with the other two in many circumstances. The DJI map is based on a high level aerodrome it's not necessarily an aerodrome map because they're only concerned about what areas they're going to restrict the drone from flying or using the unlock system. So the most important tool to use is either the Canada, like the visual navigation chart, the visual terminal area chart, the CFS.
Yeah, it has to be an official source.
Exactly.
And DJI's map is not an official source.
Yeah. So it's something that you always got to take with a grain of salt.
And last thing, cranes and moving objects.
Yep.
A big crane will take out your drone.
Yeah, and it creates a distraction and a hazard, right? So you might be asked, I've done a lot of crane filming, like filming of cranes, and you're working around the crane as the gantry's sliding back and forth. You definitely want to have multiple visual observers and people working with you and the operator having awareness of what the drone's doing.
So as we're talking on screen, we've got a time lapse of a construction site. So you can see this was taken over multiple days. It looks like probably every couple days the drone operator comes out and films basically the same shots over and over and over again.
Yeah, so using pre-programmed waypoint shots.
Yeah.
And then some ground footage, of course.
Yeah. And this is a lot of these types of things are shot not just for accuracy but also for marketing. And construction companies do use these types of videos.
Oh, totally. To get the next bid, show what their capability is. Yeah, so this was probably done by a marketing agency. Liam's got a question here. Can you take off or land from a truck bed or tonneau cover? Does this qualify as a ground takeoff? It's a parked, non-moving vehicle. Big advantage is it's not dirty or dusty. Always wonder the nuances of rules anyway with respect to this. Yeah, totally. You can use whatever platform you need to take off and land from on the top of the vehicle. There wouldn't really be any change in regulation if you're thinking about like, do I have permission to take off from this land because the vehicle's standing on the land. So yeah, you absolutely need permission to take off from it. So it would be no different than if you were taking off from the ground. You're just using a raised platform to do it. But yeah, tonneau cover would be great. It's something that's going to be nice and stable and easy. Of course, you want to watch that no wind's going to like smash it into the back of your cab. And you don't have like an aerial or a whip antenna that's in the way when you're taking off or landing. But yeah, getting the drone off the ground, getting it away from the dust. It's going to save your gimbal motors. It's going to save your camera lens, your sensors, everything.
Yeah, one of the other things that people will do is if you get a hard Pelican case, you can take off and land from the Pelican case.
Yeah, depending on the drone, of course.
Depending on the aircraft.
It can be a little challenging for like a bigger one, but
we've done it.
yeah, it's possible. But also think about the risk, right?
Yeah.
So if you use a landing pad, make sure it's a weighted landing pad. Like the big, like you can get one's the size of this table, but make sure it has like lead ringed around the side, because if you're flying a matrice, for example, the downwash might pick the landing pad up and throw it. So,
yeah.
And you can't always rely on it being able to stake it either. Okay, so this is an example of some construction work I did a few years ago for a national marketing campaign for a large construction company. And we were working on a pipeline project up in the High Alps, the Canadian High Alps. And so we used an FPV drone to capture the length of the project and just show the scale of everything that was going on. So same thing, everyone was basically, part of the tailgate process was there's a drone working in the area, everyone wearing PPE. This drone had a safety assurance declaration down to 16.5 feet, and then pretty much anyone that was in the shots was considered part of the operation in the project. So we mitigated that. And it was just a bunch of linear shots back and forth along this pipeline project that we were wrapping it up. And this is up at about 7,000 feet, I think. It was quite high altitude.
So for this operation, at some points you can see some crew.
Mm-hmm.
What was your mitigation? Were you just, I'm going to just stay 5 meters from people? But what was the briefing like for that?
Basically, if you see the drone in the air, get away from it, or don't look at it is the main thing, because if you look up and the drone were to fail, we're flying FPV, so the kinetic energy of an FPV drone, if it fails, it's going to fly forward. So it's less of like a survey drone where you're going to be falling straight down. So what we did basically is there was a circular goes out for everyone on the job, radio broadcast when the drone's in the air. Everyone basically is made aware of it and then can stay out of the way. So,
but you were maintaining the 5 meters from people.
pretty much, yeah, yeah. And well, obviously most of it was going to be well more than 5 meters. But
Yeah, like this
that's
is
our
like
minimum. 16 feet's pretty small. That's about the length of a truck,
yeah.
right? So it's pretty easy to figure out. And then when they're in equipment, when they're in vehicles, they're not considered bystanders. So the people that are up at the top of this that were right in the immediate vicinity were all people that we're working with as we're operating the drone. And then we also can use them as remote visual observers to identify, because there's helicopter pads, but the helicopter that's working on the project was part of our plan and also was grounded during the time we were doing these shots. Yeah, so like this is the full shot, and I think we used like 10 seconds of this for the final. So you can see quite a bit goes into it, and then quite a bit of it just ends up sitting on the cutting room floor.
That's just marketing. That's just life in the big city.
If you do have any more questions or anything about construction or some ideas or other opportunities you think about, or topics you want us to talk about more in depth, please be sure to put them in the comments below. Tell us what we're doing right. Tell us what we're doing wrong. We love to hear either way. Hit that like or dislike button as well. They still work. If you like the content we're doing and you want to see more of it, please hit that subscribe button. It's important to us. And share it with your friends. Share it with your colleagues. Let us know. Let everyone else know in the industry about this. Every week we do another topic in the drone space, either for fun, for work, for profit, hopefully. And we get you going to being a well-rounded and advanced drone pilot. So thanks again for watching another episode of Coastal Drone Weekly Live. And I've been Ian. This has been Finn and Cam in the back. And we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone.